Some of these cars are running as quickly, and in some cases even more quickly than they did when they were in their prime.
The level of comfort offered by the Villager is exceptionally high for a minivan. Nothing is left lacking in the way of creature comforts.
Motoring 92 is brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil.
This week we take a trip down memory lane. Hello everybody and welcome to Motoring 92. This week we're at Mosport Racetrack, and believe me, over the years this track has seen every kind of racing known to man. Well, this weekend they have something called vintage car racing, and as we're about to see, this kind of racing could be the fastest growing segment in motor racing today. It was like a trip back to the 50s and 60s. Production sports cars, classic sedans, and single-seat open-wheel race cars. Everything a race fan could ask for, including the memories.
I've been around a fair number of years now, and seeing some of these cars race, Brad, is like remembering when they were new and racing here. So it's very nostalgic for me, and it's very nostalgic for a lot of us who have been here all these years. It's growing very nicely. This year we had a growth of almost 45% in terms of entries from previous years. The largest grid of vintage racers ever. More Americans than we've ever seen come to Canada with their cars, and the good cars are in the States, so it's a pleasure to have them.
There were many familiar faces from the past at Mosport, including 55-year-old Brian Redmond. Among his many accomplishments, 15 World Sports Car Championships, along with classic victories at names like Daytona, Monza, and Brands Hatch.
Well, I suppose the trouble is, it's like any other sports person. If you spend 30 years doing something, it's hard to let go. I mean, really, you should step away and do something in administration. But you see it all the time, don't you? The ex-footballers or the ex-ice hockey stars, what do they do? You know, if they're lucky, they get a commentating job or something of that kind. But at least in car racing, you can still carry on, you know, for quite a long time, which is what I'm doing. The sport's growing tremendously. We've probably 120 cars here this weekend, and next year there'll be 150, and the year after 200. And this is what happens typically in North America with the vintage racing. We get grids now where they're turning away cars because there are too many cars. Lime Rock, 300 cars. Laguna Seca, 300 cars. They just turn the cars away. So it's been growing enormously over the last 5 years. And there are, in fact, about 30 different vintage racing organizations that organize these events.
Tell me what you're driving today.
Well, today I'm basically driving a car called a Sadler, which was designed and built by Canadian Bill Sadler in 1960-61, and it's a fearsome beast. This is the first time it's raced since those days, and yesterday was the first time really out in it. It's got a 400 horsepower Chevrolet small block engine behind the driver, very unusual in 1961. It's got Jaguar disc brakes, and it's a very short, small car, and it's quite a challenge. We managed to win the event yesterday, and hopefully, if it doesn't rain, we'll do okay with it today.
I'm from Southfield, Michigan, which is right outside of Detroit, Michigan. And the car we have here is a Lola 163A. It's a 1969 Can-Am car. It was a factory car in that year and driven by Chuck Parsons. Competed in the Tires Series. They competed here at Mosport, and I believe finished third or fourth at this race. The car finished third overall for the year in the standings, having several third and second place finishes. But in 1969, McLaren won all the races, so just finishing right behind him was a good feat. It finished the year and at the end of the year was sold to a guy named Dick Durant, who ran as a privateer in the Can-Am for a couple of years, and then it was sold and went into club racing. In 1986, I purchased the car in the as-is condition, which was with a plywood rear end and body that was tan with brown stripes and sponsored by Manchester Sewer Systems. I grew up, I graduated from high school in '67, and so I lived the Can-Am years all through my college years and went to as many as I could. And I have drawers full of photos and slides of the series, and they've always been my favorite cars. the sound of the big 8-liter motors. There's nothing like them, never will be again. It was an era of totally almost unrestricted racing, just had to be a covered car, 2 seats, equal size wheels, and at least a 3-liter motor. No wimpy motors around this series.
If somebody came up to you this weekend and wanted to buy this vehicle, what would you sell it for?
I'd sell it for $400,000 US.
What'd you pay for it?
I paid 60 for it and spent about another 100 putting it together.
We're from Torrance, California. I brought out a BT-17 Sport Racer. It's 1966. It runs a Repco engine, which is 4.2 liter, puts out about 370 horsepower. It's the one and only BT-17 that was made. Jack Brabham, when he was making cars, made the BT-8 Sport Racer, then decided to try to go into Can-Am with a bigger one. And when they realized that they were far behind the other people who were building cars at that time, they decided not to pursue it. So they built the one car, Jack raced it a couple of times, and then it went on to other races in Europe and the US, but not in the Can-Am series.
What turns you on about this? Is it the competition? Is it the memories?
Well, my interest in motorsports and racing is the historical portion of it. And I'm not a racer. As a youngster, I've taken this up late in life, and I enjoy the cars. I enjoy finding the cars. I enjoy the history of the cars, and I enjoy the racing part of it. But mainly it's in the historical preservation of these cars and getting them out on the track rather than in museums.
The fact that the times they turn is incredible. Brian Redman put the Sadler out there in the 37 or 38 second mark, 137, 138. In its prime, it was doing 142s. So some of these cars are running as quickly, and in some cases even more quickly than they did when they were in their prime, and being driven by vintage cars, being driven by vintage racers. It's really something, quite the combination.
Stick around, because when we come back, we're going to look at the newest entrant into the largest truck segment in Canada.
Test Drive with Graham Fletcher.
This week on Test Drive, we look at a totally new vehicle. This is the 1993 Mercury Villager, a vehicle that was born out of a relationship between Ford Motor Company and Nissan. The introduction of the new Villager marks the culmination of 4 years of collaboration between two of the world's leading manufacturers, Ford and Nissan. The Villager also marks the first time that Ford dealers have been given access to the Lincoln Mercury nameplate. Now that's something you'd better believe that's pleasing them. To achieve the car-like feel that the new breed of minivans must have if they are to succeed, Ford chose the Sable wagon as the benchmark for the ride and handling characteristics. Up front there are gas pressurized struts complete with a roll bar. The rear suspension utilizes leaf springs and nitrogen charged shocks. Typically the use of leaf springs in the rear results in a stiff and rather harsh ride. There is absolutely no sign of this in the Villager. Indeed, the whole setup proved to be very comfortable and compliant over a variety of different road surfaces. The 112-inch wheelbase helps things here as well. The drivetrain comes straight out of Nissan's popular and powerful Maxima. The 3-litre V6 develops 151 horses and 174 pounds-feet of torque. The resulting performance is more than adequate, even when fully loaded. Matched with this engine is a 4-speed automatic that comes complete with a lock-up converter, overdrive and dual modes. The power EAT switch located on the right side of the dash allows the driver to select one of two modes. In the power mode, each gear is held longer for optimum acceleration. In the off position, fuel economy is given priority. For those that tow or live in hilly terrain, the on-off button for the overdrive is a godsend because it eliminates the flip-flop between third and overdrive. The shifts are smooth and well coordinated. One of the few options on the Villager is a handling package. Now the package consists of stiffer springs, revised shock calibrations, a rear sway bar which really helps cut down on body roll in corners, and a much better set of Eagle GA Goodyear tyres. Now these things really help matters when you push it into a corner. There's much less of a tendency to understeer, and the whole thing feels a lot more composed in real-life driving situations. Stopping power for the Villager is provided by a standard 4-channel 4-wheel anti-lock system. The stops are obviously well controlled, and thanks to the optional handling suspension, the amount of nosedive is minimal for this style of vehicle. Credit where credit is due. It's about time somebody made the safety and security of ABS standard on what has to be considered a predominantly family-oriented vehicle. Safety is always an issue with minivans, primarily because the majority of the ones available just don't meet passenger car safety regulations. Good news, the Villager meets them all. Side impact members, knee bolsters, 3-point seat belts for all outboard passengers, and a third high-mounted stop lamp. One of the neat features on the Villager is the fact that you can actually open the tailgate glass without having to open the entire thing. That makes dropping in small bags like that very easy. The interior of the Villager is very well thought out. From the driver's seat you can reach all important controls with ease. This holds true from the power window controls and power mirrors through the cruise controls to the centrally mounted climate and radio controls. They even thought to put auxiliary controls for the latter in the rear. Now, just in case the radio controls become too much of a plaything for younger passengers, the driver can render the controls inoperative. The designer obviously had kids. The radio, which by the way comes complete with a cassette deck and in-dash CD, offers wonderful sound quality. The only thing I did not like about the dash was the rather gaudy digital instrumentation. While you can pick up the information fairly easily, it looks too much like a cheap video game. Fortunately, the base dash is of the analog variety. I say 3 cheers for common sense. The Villager offers no fewer than 14 different seating and cargo configurations. Removing the center row of seats allows you to slide the back seat forward. This is accomplished with the same sort of ease as adjusting a normal front seat. Need more space? Simply slide the seat fully forward and fold it up, and you have enough room for an 8x4 sheet to lay flat on the floor, indicating that the intrusion of the wheel wells has been kept to a minimum. My pet peeve with the Villager is the fact that it doesn't come equipped with an airbag. It's almost as though they got caught flat-footed as consumer preference for that type of safety item changed. Anyway, now to the scoreboard for a rundown on the 1993 Mercury Villager. I won't even bother getting into these things. The 3-litre V6 gives the driver access to the requisite level of power, even when loaded. The 0 to 100 km acceleration times run a shade under 11 seconds, which is not too shabby for this type of vehicle. In choosing the Sable to define the ride and handling characteristics, Ford ensured a very car-like feel. One that is not only comfortable but also predictable. There is very little in the way of body roll or understeer, especially if you opt for the handling package. The standard 4-channel anti-lock system worked to perfection during the test. Even with the weight bias towards the front of the vehicle, the amount of nosedive has been kept within acceptable limits. For the record, we required 118 feet to stop the Villager from 80k. The level of comfort offered by the Villager is exceptionally high for a minivan. Nothing is left lacking in the way of creature comforts. There are, for goodness sake, no fewer than 10 coffee cup holders. The level of wind and engine noise has been successfully kept to a minimum. During the test, we did not have the opportunity to evaluate the Villager's fuel economy accurately. However, the early Transport Canada figures rated at 13.5 litres per 100 kilometres city and 9.4 on the highway. These figures usually indicate an average economy of around 22 miles per gallon. The Villager offers class and versatility in a front-wheel drive vehicle that drives and behaves as nicely as it looks. With the addition of an airbag and an optional extended version, Ford will have a near-perfect minivan. As it is, they have one that should turn the market on its ear, and one that is sure to have the competition rather worried.
Well, these tires now in retirement might not be a good example, but when you do notice a tire wear, you usually think of improper alignment or a tire pressure. Well, this week, Bill Gardner says we should think about something else when it comes to avoiding wear on our tires.
Now, you might remember that in the last couple of weeks, I've talked about the different types of springs that could be underneath your car or light truck. And this week, I want to talk about the relationship of those springs and shock absorbers to tire wear. So if you're thinking about getting a wheel alignment done on your car, or you're having a tire wear problem, springs and shocks are more or less the foundation of the suspension and something that we should think about as a prerequisite before we do that alignment. Now, when the engineers design your car, they try and select the coil springs or leaf springs, whatever type of spring you're using, they try and select that and match it to the vehicle weight. Idea being that this lower control arm, this unit right here, okay, we want to try and have that control arm describing an arc that's very close to horizontal, okay? If you can imagine this control arm, it moves up and down with the suspension of our car. I've locked my elbow at the inner pivot, and our control arm moves up and down something like this, okay, as we go over bumps. Now, if we move it up too far, as it would be with weak springs or an overloaded vehicle, it'll start to pull the tire inwards. The arc will pull in at the top, and it will drag our tire inwards. Same thing if it goes too low at the bottom. If we've got too strong a spring or the vehicle's overloaded at one end or the other, our control arm will start to drop down in this position and we'll move in an arc something like this, again dragging the tire in on the road. Every time it drags it in and out, it does what we call tire scrub, and that rubs a little bit of rubber off that tire every time it happens. Now, it's the job of the shock absorber, remember, to limit that movement. After we've gone over a bump, we don't want that control arm just oscillating around forever, because there again, we're going to have excessive tire scrub. So the shock absorber controls the movement, and the spring regulates the ride height, tries to keep that control arm very close to the horizontal position. The other thing I want you to think about is the length of this tie rod end. There's our outer tie rod. Inside that boot right about there is our inner tie rod socket. And this length is very close, or almost exactly the length of the effective length of our lower control arm. So these two arms will move almost in exactly the same arc as we're going over a series of bumps, and we won't have what we call toe change, which is another major factor in tire wear. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 92.
Well, thanks to the vintage car racers here at Mosport, we've all been able to take a trip down memory lane. But it's now time to take a sneak preview of what could be our driving future.
Although many of us are still trying to figure out how to program our VCRs, car companies want to sell us cars with satellite navigation systems and other technological wonders. Technologies from other areas, such as fighter aircraft, are now being adapted to help people avoid crashes.
In the area of how big it is in terms of crash avoidance opportunities, it's a huge endeavor between Hughes Aircraft, our Delco Electronics, and the GM corporate staffs. This is a multi-billion-dollar effort to try and look at the most effective technology for the future to put on the vehicle that compensates for driving errors and extends our senses to make things safer.
General Motors uses microwave electronics to automatically detect objects that are immediately in front of, behind, or on either side of the vehicle. In parallel parking, for example, if a vehicle begins to approach an object, an audible beep and visual display will warn the driver an object is in front of the vehicle. When backing up, the sensors will also detect an object and alert the driver. On the road, sensors will detect objects to either side of the vehicle. When the turn signals are activated for a change of lane, the system will warn the driver not to change lanes.
It's a dark night on a country road. The unfamiliar territory makes you a little uneasy. Your eyes strain to see. Is there something in the road up ahead?
It's called night vision, and in the future, you'll be able to see beyond the darkness with a quick glance at your display screen. This video illustrates General Motors' Vision Enhancement System. A special infrared sensor translates heat into images that appear on the viewing screen. Infrared technology dramatically extends your range of vision. A typical driver can see a person in dark clothes at about 280 feet. With the vision enhancement, that person would be visible 1,600 feet away. The system can also improve visibility in thick fog and heavy rain, and reduce the glare of oncoming headlights. The future will also see radar units in our cars to stay a safe distance away from other traffic. And yes, we'll even have cars that will drive themselves. Now, if we could only figure out how to program that darn VCR. After years of being the sports car company, Nissan Canada now wants to be the sedan company. It's a critical transition. To help make Canadians aware of this change, Nissan invited a few Canadian auto writers to their California design studio in La Jolla.
Yeah, I have to admit, in Canada, we were not there yet. And the answer is Ultima, the true North American Nissan car for the biggest segment of market in Canada.
Obviously, this is not a sports car, this is not a van, this is not an off-road vehicle, this is what we call a car. I don't know what else to call it. It's a car. It's right in the middle. It has no eccentricities about it. It's a volume on four wheels to carry a certain number of people, a certain amount of luggage, at a certain speed and level of performance.
Right now, Stanza accounts for about 9% of our total sales, and that's not enough. Our target is basically to raise this percentage into the mid-20s within the next 4 years. We want to raise where we are right now, which as I say is around 9%, to higher than Camry, which is around 20. But in order to do that, it's got to be done within the context of our brand position. So we're not intending to do this by discounting or rebates or whatever. This has got to be done by having the Ultima, in a sense, become the essence of the brand position for Nissan in Canada.
I've got my life in this briefcase, and I'm not going to let some punk steal it. I'll be back in a moment on Kenzies Corner.
Kenzies Corner with Jim Kenzie.
There's a story out of New York City that a guy parked his car with this sign taped to his window, hoping to deter car thieves. When he got back, he found his window smashed and this sign taped to his dashboard. You just can't win. You know, car theft isn't as big a problem in Canada yet as it is in the States, but it's growing every day. It costs us millions of dollars in lost property and all sorts of emotional anguish, because often the things that are stolen are personal, like videotapes of your vacation. Now, the police have a lot of trouble applying the kind of resources they need to solve each individual crime because they're all relatively petty deals. Collectively, though, it's a big issue. And we as a society have to fight these young punks who are stealing all our stuff just to finance their drug habits. First thing you can do, don't buy stolen property, no matter how big a temptation it might be. If we reduce the market, we can eventually reduce the crime. If you've got a car radio, try and protect it. Now, this particular car has a radio that can be removed with 2 pieces of bent coat hanger wire. Not much of a deterrent. Some car radios are theft coded. If they're disconnected from the battery, you need a secret code to make them work again, and that's a good idea. If you have to park your car in the street with valuables in it, obviously a sedan like this with a proper trunk is the secure way to go. If you have a four-wheel drive or a hatchback, you've got a wide open expanse there where stuff can be easily seen by onlookers. Many vehicles like this have a privacy screen to hide your stuff from the prying eyes. Now, the guy in the 4x4 here hasn't deployed his privacy screen, so he's asking for trouble. The guy in the Mustang has got his screen in place. He might have something back there the thief doesn't know, and it's probably better that he doesn't. But the real secret, if you value something, don't leave it in your car. A car alarm? Sure, that'll probably deter the amateur, maybe not the professional. But still, I'm afraid the most effective security system is an angry Doberman in the back seat. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Well, the vintage car racing is over here at Mosport, and now the hard work really begins. You see, most of these people who come from all over North America drive here. Now they have to get back out on the highway to drive home. Nobody's looking forward to that, but they are looking forward to getting home and savoring all the memories that play such a big part in this kind of racing. Well, that is it for now. We'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
Motoring 92 has been brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil.